Let's switch to the other one, the other NL wildcard series here. And we just watched it. Mets Brewers. The Mets were in Milwaukee to close their season, got a big victory, flew to Atlanta, got to celebrate, and then flew right on back to Milwaukee. Here's the thing about this series. Because the Mets won game one today, their pitching's in pretty good shape. They got Luis Severino. They got Shamanai going game two. And their bullpen did not get taxed too much today, despite the doubleheader. Joey Lucchesi got called up, minor league pitcher for the Mets, pretty much all year. I think he made a couple spot starts. He gave them 6 innings. Huascar Brazaban and Adam Ottavino covered the other ones. Those are guys that are either going to be left off the roster or they're sort of at the end of the bullpen. I know for a fact Jose Budo and Reed Garrett, guys that can go multiple innings, did not pitch today or yesterday. So the Mets have arrested enough bullpen. They don't have Edwin Diaz for game one. I would assume he threw 26 pitches on Sunday and 50 plus today. So I think Edwin's probably shot until at least game two. But the Mets have, in my opinion, maybe a little bit of an edge when it comes to the starting pitching in this series. The Brewers got Freddie Peralta, but I don't know who's starting game two or game three. They've showed us that they can win with their bullpen, but I think the Mets got a real shot here.
If you want to say that the weekend was an indicator of what was going to happen, that doesn't mean the Mets lose this series in 3. It means they get swept in 2, right? Because they lost Friday and Saturday before salvaging a win on Sunday. But you're right. Like, that's so interesting. I don't know that we've ever had, and again, with the 2 games in Atlanta, that changes the Mets' schedule. So they didn't end their season in Milwaukee. But that would be wild to think you end a season against one team and then you play them immediately. So I'm sure we're in some kind of first where 2 teams playing each other that close together in the regular season and then in the postseason. But I think that benefits the hitters more than anything, because when you have a batter who's seen a pitcher multiple times and even has had a modicum of success, even just a little bit, they say to a man that they can just harken back on those memories of the success that they had in the box, and that's beneficial. But if you're a pitcher going against a hitter that's never seen you before, the pitcher has the advantage because you don't know what that arsenal looks like. And good pitching always beats good hitting. Unknown hitting can't defeat unknown pitching. So the advantages to the pitching, except now in this series. So it does become interesting looking at that matchup where, again, the bullpens are a little bit more exposed to both teams, whereas the starting pitching, again, that's really where I think the series comes down to, is the starting pitching, because Milwaukee hasn't seen the Mets guys quite as much. New York hasn't seen the Brewers starters quite as much. And so I think that's where this series is going to ultimately come down to, especially in the case of the Mets, who have, a bullpen a little bit more on gas than Milwaukee does with the extra day off.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think this is the ultimate series to sort of test that theory of rest versus momentum. If the Mets will win, if they come off of winning this game one and then they go into the wild card round and they win the first game of this series, I think that'll largely be riding that momentum that they gained from winning in such dramatic fashion. The Brewers have owned the Mets this year, and I don't want to say I'm going into this series completely confident the Mets are going to win, because I did watch Friday, Saturday, and I watched the beginning of the season. And what if you aren't paying attention to the Brewers and you're just seeing the record, what you don't notice is just how athletic they are. At every position, they got a guy that has wheels, and they make incredible plays in the field defensively. They get on base. They're all a threat to run, and they were just running circles around the Mets the first couple games. So that's definitely a big thing to watch in this series, the way the Brewers can manufacture runs. The Mets, the question is, some of those guys that started to hit home runs, Brandon Nimmo, Francisco Lindor, they have Pete Alonso, who has not hit a homer in a minute, Mark Vientos. If the Mets can outslug the Brewers, I think they win this series. But if this just strictly comes down to pitching, defense, speed, bullpen, the Brewers, I think, will win this series.
Yeah, Milwaukee had 11 players this year, or rather 8 players this year with 11 or more home runs, and they had 9 players with 11 or more steals. So Bryce Terang quietly stealing 50 bases for Milwaukee. So, right, they've got that power-speed combination, and while this is a largely young group, you got to remember Milwaukee has gone to the postseason 5 of the last 7 years. So there is some, a lot of playoff experience there, especially with guys like Freddie Peralta, still on that roster, and Rhys Hoskins, who I'm sure loves killing the Mets and has quite the track record of doing so, formerly with the Phillies. So I think this is also going to be a series with a lot of juice. And, whether Miller Park, formerly Miller Park, now American Family Field, is open or closed, again, those are going to be different advantages that the Milwaukee's going to have at home, and feeling comfortable knowing, hey, we just handled these guys previously towards the end of the season when we didn't have something to play for. They were giving their best. They were giving their all, and we were still able to take it to them 2 out of 3. Hey, let's go do that exact same thing again. So, again, that advantage is still to Milwaukee, but you're right. The Mets have that momentum after taking the more critical game 1 on Monday in the Atlanta series.
Yeah, I do wonder, Pat Murphy came out and said, we're playing these games hard because they wanted that doubleheader to get played out here. They wanted to see the Mets travel to Atlanta, play 18 innings, come right on back. And now I think that takes, not that there'd be any excuses, but I don't, we had a Twitter Spaces this morning, and I was talking about the series a little bit. And one of the things I said is, at a certain point, the Brewers surprise us every year and they make it. They need to have some playoff success. It's been a long time since they really have made it out of the first round. They had that run in, I think it was 2018, where they were a game away from the World Series. They lost to the Dodgers, but they really haven't had a lot of playoff success since then. And I know a lot of these guys are new faces. Jackson Chourio, Bryce Terang, a lot of these guys have not been key figures for the Brewers for other playoff runs. But as a franchise, you keep getting there. You got to have some playoff success. So I think maybe not to the same degree as the Padres. It's a pretty big disappointment if the Brewers can't secure this series at home against a Mets team that they just handled, that they won 5 of 6 against during the regular season, who should be taxed coming off 18 grueling innings on Monday just to get in.
That's a good point. That in the last four years that Milwaukee went to the postseason, they won 1 game. They lost the wild card game in 2019 and 2020 when there was a wild card round for that 1 year. They got swept in 2 games. They won a game in the division series in 2021. And you're right, in 2023, they lost 2 games against the Diamondbacks. So, Milwaukee is not the fortress that, I think San Diego certainly could be. And with a little bit of the success that the Mets have had, they can just build on that because, as we're saying, look, this is a 3-game series, best of. Anybody can take it. And it's going to come down to starting pitching, and you have to like what the Mets have right now.
So who do you got, Patrick? Mets, Brewers, how many games? What are you thinking?
I think the Mets are going to pull the upset. They're going to take 2 of 3 in Milwaukee and move on to the next round and go ahead and face off with the Phillies. And I think that's what everybody wants to see. That will just be those 2 gigantic monster trucks going head to head. The fan bases are the monster trucks, maybe more so than the teams going head to head. That would be craziness. It's not the NLCS, but still, it's Phillies, Mets in the postseason. That's kind of a rarity that those 2 teams have matched up. They have in the past, but not as much as you might think. It's usually just kept to the regular season. So I think I want to see that happening as well. The Mets taking it in 3 games. How about you?
You took my answer. I think that's where I was going to go to. Obviously, I mean, look behind me. Who would think I'm going to take the Brewers? Come on. But I will say, I think Major League Baseball, kind of like you mentioned, probably wants that as well. If they could have coming into this weekend, Mets versus Phillies, Padres versus Dodgers for the TV dollars, that's the best possible outcome for Major League Baseball, which means it probably won't happen. So who's going to pull off the upsets? Well, I guess in this case, the Mets would be the upset, but we will see how the NL shakes out.